guideline which would be implementable. It culminated into action points in 2022. Government of India took initiative and came out with the EPR guidelines and the modified version of the plastic waste management rules. The latest guidelines are chartered to energize and strengthen circularity. If you see the concept, it is addressing the complete circularity. This has also got a few distinctive features, unlike the ones which are published by the global fraternity. One, that it lays down a roadmap for the future. It recognizes the lack of infrastructure for collection and recycling and has provided a 5 to 10 years time frame for 100% compliance. Secondly, it comprehensively addresses the issue of both the collected as well as the uncollected waste. It fosters an ecosystem where the producers, importers, and the brand owners all come on a single centralized digital platform to transact business. The manufacturers of the product create and design a product which can be put to reuse easily and restore multiple number of times through either recycling or upcycling. Last but not the least, it allows sale and purchase of the surplus EPR certificates. This triggers the market mechanism. Any guideline, any enforcement which does not trigger market mechanism is bound to fail. So this has been nicely designed. We have a very knowledgeable panel today to discuss all this and more. We will discuss the ground realities of the environmental issues, how the EPR will help reach the projected circularity, and demystifying certain elements of the EPR guidelines. Let me first begin with Dr. Habu. Dr. Habu, I'm sure you must be excited too with this session. There has been a grave concern and worry amongst the stakeholders that in the absence of a robust collection system, how effective will the EPR compliance be? Dr. Habu.
I think much has been said already since morning that an essential ingredient or the pivot or the heart of recycling is the collection. You could precede it by segregation, cleaning, transportation, but these are the four basic ingredients before the material reaches the recycling structure. So without, and we just heard just in the R cycle panel also, that unless collection is in place, no amount of technologies, whether it's recycling, mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, end of life, whatever it is, these are all lesser of challenges than the collection challenges. The question is, if there is no collection, what do we do? Then obviously everything is going to go into the litter. And then how do you tackle it? If that is the hidden part of the question, then we will have to design and think differently of how to manage litter. But then that is a waste of resources. If we want to extract value out of resources, then bringing it back into the recycling stream is essential. And therefore, I do not see any other alternative to collection mechanisms. India, mercifully, although not in a very elegant way, has a very robust recycling collection system, which is variously called either rack pickers, waste pickers, clean engineers, whatever it is. But that is what has given about 60-65% of recycling rate for plastics. So if the question is, if there is no proper collection, what will happen to all these ideas? Then would they become fancy terms? Yes, that is the answer. So this is where industry and all players, like Mr. Reifenhauser said, if industry doesn't think about it as a cohesive unit to tackle this problem, then nobody else is going to help us. Industry will have to help itself. And therefore, the focus of everybody should be in how to make the plastic packaging, whether it's rigid or flexible, collectible, more remunerative for collection, more easy for collection. Answered that.
Uh, Well said, Dr. Abu. So there are two elements to it. One is the regulator, other is the industry which is facilitating recycling. But the missing element is an organized collection infrastructure which is essential to the success of EPR. My next question is to Dr. Tyagi. Yeah. I heard Mr. Patawari say that the success of EPR will entirely depend on how good or bad is the collection, cost of collection. What have you factored in as a cost impact of the EPR implementation on the ground? Are the brand owners aware of this? Will it be passed on to the end consumer?
Good afternoon to everybody. First of all, I am thankful to Nidhi for providing this opportunity to be present here. EPR implementation is a very new regime to our industry, which we are implemented from the last few years. The cost of EPR implementation is somewhat where between rupees 5 to 7 rupees per kg, depending upon the location, from which location you are collecting the EPR waste. We are not passing this cost of EPR collection to our end consumer, and we don't have any plan in the future also to pass this cost to our end consumer. We are bearing this cost in our bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tyagi. So we have heard about this tax avoidance is smartness and tax evasion is crime. So in EPR also, there is a possibility of EPR avoidance by using biodegradable plastics, but certainly there is no provision for EPR evasion. My question is to Mr. Sri Krishnan Balachandran. Will, as always, the industry look for possible loopholes, or would it genuinely make an attempt for compliance?
It's an interesting question. I think it's both ways. Definitely, industries would want to comply. That goes without saying that definitely industries do want to comply. But they want to comply at the lowest cost with the lowest impact in the margins. But if there are some loopholes, we cannot generalize industry, because then there are a wide variety of industries. There are industries which take proactive steps. There are industries which wait for the rules to come in, and there are industries which trade also. So overall, I think definitely in terms of compliance, nobody wants to be non-compliant because it affects their business. Everybody wants to comply. I don't think there is anybody who doesn't want to comply. But what is the cost of compliance and how that compliance can also be turned into a business advantage is also that industry works towards. But definitely, if there are some loopholes, companies will try to gauge the risk and take a precautive measure, as in the case with any legislation. So EPR is no different from that.
Thank you so much. The PCR plastics collected from the MRFs in India, they have a lot of oil. They have a lot of food elements which are normally not found in the Western world. Hence, the recycling system has to be properly designed for Indian conditions. It has to be customized to handle the plastic waste available in our country. My next question is to Mr. Aditya Dalmia. How can designing help recycling?
Designing can definitely help recycling in a very large way. Like Dr. Habu was mentioning, we have a very robust collection system that includes the rag picker, the housekeeping staff, the local kabadiwalas, the material specific aggregators. Now, if you normally find that these people are only picking up something that has value, what does not have value will always find its way to the landfill. And most of the landfills will only find, all non-recyclable products. So if designing is done in a way whereby it creates value, whether it's for rigid or whether it's for flexible, both would get picked up through this fantastic chain of collectors that we have. And definitely the stress on the landfill would reduce substantially. Just as small examples, we say that flexible is not picked up. I don't see any milk pouch never being picked up. You'll find every single milk pouch being picked up because that has pure value,
Absolutely.
And the, another thing is like, for example, in designing, what I would say is, let's take an example of a PET bottle. Now, a PET bottle is standalone, that's a PET bottle. Then it could, it is labeled, so you'll have a PVC label, you'll have a BOPP label, and you'll have a PETG label. The cap would either be of a PP or a HDP. So, if it is designed in a way that, across the board, you're only using, say, BOPP. So then that makes all the labels recyclable, and it would avoid landfill. Similarly, if you have the cap, it's either PP or HDP, it's a single polymer, and both function the same way. So then, once again, you're creating further value to that. And it definitely have better collection values to it. So designing definitely is a very, very important role that it can play in recycling.
Thank you, Mr. Dalmia. So the EPR draft, when it was published first in January, it has, if you all know, there are two components to it. One is the responsibility to collect, and then there are obligations set out. The obligations would mean that some portion of the material has to be recycled. This was mandated from 2023-24, but now it has been shifted in the final guidelines. It has been shifted to 24-25. My question to Mr. Mani Vijay is that by allowing MLPs to be sent to cement cleans for till 2024-25 and encouraging brands to do more of the same, what would incentivize brands to switch from MLPs to recyclable or generally more sustainable materials? How do we catalyze design for recyclability in flexibles?
Perhaps the same way we've done in rigids as well. I think fundamentally, if you look at water bottles made from PET or HDPE and polypropylene bottles, India has a world-class track record. In fact, in the last 12 months, over 500 million FMCG bottles for shampoos, lotions, and other home care, personal care applications in India were recycled, and the bottles that you find on the shelves in India are made from recycled plastic. And as Mr. Dalmia was explaining, mono material packaging really catalyzes the informal recyclers to pick the materials and bring them to recyclers like Banyan Nation or Dalmia Polyprac. I think in the EPR regulations, enforcement of use of recycled material back in packaging is a tremendous driver for companies to fundamentally make packaging that is recyclable in nature, because they're going to be reaping the reward or the crime that the crime pays forward. So if you don't design for recyclability, it's going to come and bite you in the backside. So I think as much as Banyan Nation or other companies are innovating in paint removal, ink removal, and whatnot, I think design for recyclability and use of recycled plastic back again in the packaging is a great catalyst, is what I think.
Thank you, sir. My next question is to Dr. Habu. So first time in the history of EPRs or in the history of plastic waste management rules, Government of India has provided an option to evade EPR, to avoid EPR, not evade EPR, if you are able to use a biodegradable material. My question here is, how does the regulatory system enforce to distinguish between the users of certified biodegradable materials and claimed biodegradable materials? In India, you have all types of people. They will say this is biodegradable, and there is no way you can identify by look and feel that material is biodegradable or not. Do you think the enforcement will be critical and difficult?
Indeed, I mean, this poses a classical problem of, firstly, the answer is, straightaway answer is going to be extremely difficult to forget visual looks. Even analytical tools are not told, because all these so-called biodegradable additive-based materials are so-called proprietary. They don't even tell you what are the QC techniques to identify the nature of the additive, forget let alone the quantitative method. So there is also there is a gap of what the samples are submitted for testing to get approval and what actually gets added. Because cost cutting, as the panelists said, will be an industry driver. So it will always work on the minds of industry how to save costs. But what is lost is that this poses a kind of classical situation of what happens when any thought is in a state of flux. We forget, we are sometimes too harsh on ourselves, we as in plastic industry and plastic stakeholders. We are either too harsh on ourselves or we are too laid back. Plastics as a material got invented after 2,500 years. The last new material invented was probably paper, 500 years BC. And for a new material, for plastics to appear on the scene as a new material, it took around, the early part of the 20th century. So for a new material that has been with us only for 100 years, to find all remedies to all these problems within a fraction of 10 years because there is a global noise against plastic litter is too much to ask. Therefore, a lot of these noises that we are seeing around is good. It's a churning that is what is reflected is a churning that is happening and remedies will come. But what is also forgotten in the pressure that comes because of the regulators by the industry is that industry uses the word plastics without knowing that plastics are based on polymers. And I see very little of polymer science, the power of polymer science being used to address various problems. Just now we were, in the early parts we heard about innovation. What does innovation mean? You will find different materials and different combinations of materials to bring about a certain set of properties and functionalities. By the very token, the more complex you make it, the more difficult to make it to recycle. So here is a conundrum. You are pushing for innovation, and then you're also wanting recycling. The two are not going to happen. Therefore, the only remedy probably in our hands is the use of polymer science. If I were to ask how many converters or manufacturers or big brands have polymer scientists in their employment to develop new materials, people develop new materials, no doubt about it, and they are good materials. But they are more often than not, they are complex materials. And then Mr. Patwari and the likes of him find it difficult for them to kind of churn back into value-added materials because the yield itself will go down. So therefore, we are in a state where we need to go back to basic polymer science. Otherwise, things and concepts like biodegradable material will only be avenues for evading enforcement.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you, sir. Dr. Tyagi, we are in the middle of the EPR regime. There is no way out. We have to comply. But in terms of compliance, what is the ground reality? You are a brand owner, so you know. Recently, I was traveling to Ahmedabad, and not to name a company, there was a juice pack which I got, and there was a plastic straw. So the straw is not supposed to be used from 1st of July. So on the ground, what is the reality, sir?
Yeah, compliance is always priority list of Haldiram. Just to make the question answer, Haldiram is doing 100% compliance. And we are not doing the compliance. We are also seeing that whether we are contributing to the environment or not. We have got a one step ahead, and we are starting our recycling plant. Haldiram made a joint venture with some recycler, that the name of the company is HR Recycling Private Limited. This company is going to be start early of the next year, in which whatever plastic waste we will collect from the market, we will recycle in our joint venture and make the plastic granule. And this plastic granule will be used for making the various products, just like a furniture, just like a pallets, just like a spare parts, etc. the main aim of collecting the plastic wastage and doing the Haldiram is self-recycling to make the authentication so that really in actual terms, in a transparent way, we can contribute to the environment. The capacity of this plant is 8,000 to 10,000 metric ton per annum. And this is the initial phase, and definitely as a part of the Haldiram, because we believe the customer is our God. And our commitment of the organization is very confirmed that whatever we'll do for the nature, we will try to see that whether it can be implemented 100% or not by way of the running our plant itself, collecting the wastage, making the plastic granule, so that we can actually see on the floor that whatever we are doing really helping to the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So kudos to Haldiram, and I hope other brand owners also follow this. It's a great initiative by you, sir. Thank you so much. India produces something like 200,000 metric tons of flexible packaging material a month. And if EPR has to be taken seriously and implementation and compliance have to be made, you would need something like 2,000 recycling plants. A typical recycling plant recycles about 100 metric tons. My question is to Mr. Dalmia. We do not have enough recyclers in the country to meet the recycling requirement in the year 2024-25 as mandated in the EPR. Do you see a lot of investments pouring in this segment? What is the gut feel? Are the recyclers excited, and are they keen to bring in more investments?
Yeah, if you compare, maybe 3 years ago or 4 years ago, there was not much, to be talked about recycling. It was just, you would produce recycling material only to substitute cost. So that was the basic, so it's a cheaper material, so you want to use that material. But now the concept is changing, the word sustainability is there, circularity is there, a lot of interest, a lot of traction is coming in. So though investments are being talked about, few of them have already gone on stream, but you can definitely expect a lot of investments to come in the recycling sector. But how far it would target 25, 26, we cannot say that, but you'll definitely see a lot of recycling companies coming.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mani, what changes, you have read the EPR policy very thoroughly, so what changes to the EPR policy will ensure that there is a real impact in terms of reduction of plastic waste on the ground, maybe in the next 2 years or so?
I think we've already covered the point of use of recycled plastic back in packaging. I think a lot of the speakers and leaders before me have highlighted the fact that while the policy framework in the country is very sound, the implementation and the execution of the policy framework and the enforcement of the policy is the most important thing, right? I think these two will be the key drivers in enforcing the policy. I think you have to enforce the policy, particularly in the collection. But I don't want to sound like a broken record. But I think the more recycled plastic you start using back in your packaging, I think a lot of things will set right, because that's a very complex thing to do. I think, as Sir mentioned, we've broken this down not into a polymer science problem, but into an emotional problem. So that's where most of the startups are working on right now. In fact, demetallization, paint removal, layer separation has been passed down to startups like ours, saying that you go figure out how to do this, and investors don't find the yields and the returns, and they shy away from making the commitments. Right? So there's a lot of levers. I think the policy is there. We need to drive enforcement real hard.
Thank you. So I had a few points to discuss with the panel members, which I thought was pertinent. I would now like to hear questions from the audience. Before that, let us understand that EPR is here to stay. There is no way around it. So we have to be positive and put all our efforts to see that the EPR implementation and compliance is taking place as projected by the Government of India. We can take questions. Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask the panelists, if the figure of 60% Indian recycling, is it really correct? It's a very lofty, ambitious point. Even in Europe, with the best practices, we have about 35, 50